Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Zee Garcia. Hi.
And this is the start of a series that we're going to go over for, I think, 10 episodes, right?
That's right. If I know what a decade means, then indeed.
Well, we got to be careful because some people know that a decade technically goes from 2011 to 2020, December 31st, 2020. But whatever.
I agree with those people, by the way.
You do?
Sure, but, you know, that's okay, too. This is fine.
It's just easier. It's easier to say 10 and 11 go together.
The teens are tens, yes.
Teens.
The 20s, yes.
That's right. We're looking at the teens here. So each of these videos, we're going to go through that decade in very macro lens.
Absolutely. We'll be covering 1 year each video. These will be coming at you pretty fast, and we're going to be breaking down each video over a few different talking points. So we're going to basically do this in 4 pieces. Not all of them the same length, of course.
But before we do that, real quick, let's do a shout out to some of our Kickstarter backers.
Hold up.
Hey, so we want to say thank you to the Brettspiel Cafe, Werfel, and Zucker in Hamburg, Germany. Christopher Wiley and Ringstrew Games.
Nice.
George, Rebecca, James, and Ella Wright from Sydney, Australia.
I love those guys.
And
Alberto Rodriguez.
Yes, it's from someone who's just wanted to hear me say that. Dice
well,
rollers.
You still gotta say it then.
All right, Alberto Rodriguez.
That was a really bad attempt at that. You tried to do that wrong? You did a nice job.
What a jerk. Anyhow.
Thank you very much, everybody. We truly appreciate your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, so what are these 4 sections
These
here?
4 sections are as follows. We'll be talking about the top games of the year, whichever year we're talking about, 2010 in this case. We will talk about 10s, anything that we've spotted as being a trend, the beginning of something, the escalation of something. We will then talk about our picks for that year. What did we really like that year? What do we think about it now? Did we go to any conventions? That sort of thing. Our year in review. And then we'll end up with you, our viewers, with viewers' picks. What did you think of the year? What were some highlights for you? What stood out? Are you still playing those games? That sort of thing. So we're going to kick it off with the very beginning here with top games of the year.
So we're going to take a look here at BoardGameGeek.com, which is the website we use on a daily basis to look at all different games. And so I have it here with the top games from 2010. And we can see the top game there, which is surprisingly ranked only at 48, considering how big this game was, is 7 Wonders.
I actually think that's really good for being 10 years old.
That's true.
A lot of games, BGG can be a bit of a volatile website when it comes to new games. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised that a game from 2010 is still holding on to this spot, very prominent spot. So that says something about 7 Wonders. A lot of what it says is actually that it's had a lot of expansions, probably.
The year before, I was talking to the guy who was running Repos at the time, and he said, this game is going to blow everything away. It's going to be a Spiel des Jahres. I said, well, maybe calm down, wait to see. But he was right.
He was not wrong. He was not wrong. And that's a rare thing for somebody to make a claim like that and not be very, very off point.
Dominant Species, interesting. This is 10 years old. Chad Jensen sadly just passed away a couple weeks ago. This one was a new thing in a sense, a heavy Euro game that appealed to war gamers.
Right.
Then Trois, which was kind of just remade. Somewhat
kind of
Black
just
Angel.
remade into Black Angel, or at least Black Angel is inspired by it, yes.
Rune War surprised me that it's so high up on the list, considering I don't see anyone talk about this. Like Twilight Imperium has had a fairly long legs. This is the fantasy. I gotta be careful because it's not a direct fan, but it's very similar. And actually, they confused the waters by a few years ago making Rune Wars miniature game.
That's right.
That's not what this is. This was a big board game in which you had armies fighting and also heroes running around doing quests.
That's right. Now, remind me if I'm wrong here, or correct me rather if I'm wrong. Is this the one that had terrain that you would pop through the board?
There was these mountain pieces that went on the board.
Like the cardboard board had holes.
Man,
and
I
you
don't
would
remember
sit the
if it-
mountains within it. Is that right? Yeah. I thought it was a very interesting looking game. I never did play it. It was not my style. We'll talk about that a little later, my style, so to speak. But yeah, Rune Wars had a good look. Navigador was also a heavy Euro game. And I think there were a lot of good heavy Euro games, though, again, they tend to float to the top on a website like BGG. And then Alien Frontiers. This was an important game.
Sure, because it was the game that was the first. I don't know if it's the first game on Kickstarter, but it was definitely the first one anyone noticed.
And it's
I had
also-
never heard of Kickstarter until it came out.
And it's the first one that, looking back now, 10 years later, is clearly still prominent, and
Yeah, 196 is
played.
not a thing. Sid Meier's Civilization, this was the second version of this, but the first one Fantasy Flight had done. Merchants and Marauders. Man, it's weird for me to look at some of these games and realize they're 10 years old.
I agree. I agree with that. Yes, yes. Fresco was another Euro game, and they were trying to explore a few different themes here. Still, the time period that most of them seemed to be set in, but they were trying to stab at it with a different twist with the painting and so forth. And then Glenmore is another one that I thought was interesting because
We're really like in a decade now.
it just got remade, pseudo remade. It's out with called Glenmore 2 Chronicles. It's really the base game with a lot of expansion, a lot of stuff around that. Great production, by the way, on that. And then Hanabi, which was one of the big winners of the year.
Yeah, actually, so there's two Spiel des Jahres winners came out in the same year. That can happen. Seven Wonders came out and won the Spiel des Jahres, I think, in 2010.
Sure.
And then Hanabi won it the following year. And that's just the way dates work. GMT had a pretty strong year here with Command and Colors Napoleonics and Labyrinth, which was the first sort of sequel to Twilight Struggle, which they had been pushing for a while. And Vinhos, which was one of the first, maybe the first time that Vitel Lacerda became a prominent name. And it still was a few years before people started frothing just hearing him.
Same thing for Antoine Boza. He was at the absolute top of his game. Not to say he's done, but Seven Wonders and Hanabi the same year. This was a guy definitely, telling the world I'm here now as a prominent designer, coming out of that French designers world that has given us a lot of great, game makers. But Antoine Boza is one of the younger ones of that crowd, or at least one of the newer folks in that crowd. And this year was a slam dunk year for him. This was, in my opinion, his year to really show up.
There's also, it's weird to me to see like 370 is Earth Reborn, which is almost a completely forgotten game.
I agree. I remember we've played this, actually.
I looked at the game and I was like, this is amazing. It looked like a Kickstarter game before Kickstarter games was a thing.
Before they looked like that, yes.
Right, so this was...
and it just completely vanished. This came out from Z-Man Games, if I'm not mistaken. We played it. It was a sprawling big game. It wasn't amazing, but it was interesting. There were no expansions. There was no support, seemingly, and it vanished. No one's brought this back. And I don't know if anybody would. We're talking about some of these games.
Not now, right?
People are bringing some of these games back, right? Glenmore's been out of print for a long time, and some of these other Euro games. I think, ultimately, again, from a macro sort of point of view, I think Euro games age more gracefully than American-style games.
I will not argue that. I think that's true.
I don't see Earth Reborn coming back without major reworkings to implement what's happening now in that kind of game.
Sure. There's a couple other smaller things down the list here that are interesting. Forbidden Island is only 661. It's pretty high.
Yes.
But this was a huge deal because it was a game from Matt Leacock, who had done Pandemic, and
Yes.
at this point Pandemic was starting to take buzz, that showed up in mass market stores.
That's right.
And I had not seen this done really, a game like that. And then underneath that, the Dungeons & Dragons Castle Ravenloft board game was one of the first times that D&D had been brought to the board game version.
Yep.
There's now like 7 games in this line.
And there are Magic the Gathering board games now. And there was sort of this breaching different types of gamers together. You like D&D role-playing? Here's a board game for you. Oh, you like Magic the Gathering collectible card game? there is this other thing you might like, and sort of, mixing your flavors a little bit. You could kind of have it all.
So lots of interesting things that came out this year, but I don't know that I want to talk too much more about this without going into trends.
I agree. So let's go ahead and take a look at the trends of the year here. I've listed a few different ones that I noticed myself. You can jump in with your own here, Tom, and tell me what you think. The big one, I think, one that can still be felt today, was deck building. Dominion came out in 2008.
Yes.
Now we can very safely say it began an entire new category, genre of games, being deck building, of course. And this year we had several Dominion expansions. We had the beginning of Ascension, one of the more popular deck building games that is still going on today. We had several expansions to Thunderstone. Those are three of the big ones.
I would argue that 2010 was the height of Dominion.
Yeah.
Prosperity came out. Alchemy came out before Prosperity. Was not, you said it was like the first
chink in its armor. Yeah, I think Alchemy was the first one that felt like, which is funny to think about now, but the first one that felt like, maybe you don't need to do this much.
Right. But
they
Prosperity
recovered, yes.
And this was still like, when I would see people playing, go to the meetup groups, everyone was still playing Dominion.
Yes, it was everywhere.
The thing. And then Ascension came out, and I believe you and I played it the very first time. Were you there when I brought it out?
Probably.
And we criticized the artwork quite a bit.
It was quite bad. And
I had no idea it would be as popular.
They've recovered, but yes, I agree. And it was, again, those early deck building games just felt very much like the designers were wide-eyed and took this and made something similar, but largely with the same bones. Ascension, Thunderstone, very similar games. In their inception, right at the beginning. They've eventually become different. And then you had things like Puzzle Strike, which was kind of Dominion, and they changed the form to be poker chips instead of
Which did
cards.
not become a trend, actually.
Not at all.
I think David Sirlin was like, oh yeah, everyone's going to move to poker chips, and I don't know that a single game did. It's expensive. It's bag building. I guess it was kind of the first bag builder, right?
You could
but
say
that didn't become a thing till later on, really.
Yeah. They are expensive. So for it to be a printed poker chip is too pricey. You can throw cubes in a bag, not poker chips. That's not sustainable.
But at this point in time, I'll agree, deck building was king. If you wanted to make a game that was the hot thing, deck building.
Agreed. You've arrived when Friedman Freese makes a game using your mechanism, and indeed he did with Familia, a two-player card game that was a deck building game. We also had, of course, as we said, Kickstarter beginning, really.
At this point in time, I kind of looked at Kickstarter as this novelty. I remember when I saw Alien Frontiers, and I thought, that's a cool way to do a game. And it made, $35,000? And I was like, it made so much money. Wow.
Yeah.
And we saw a few other games start using it, but it did not become a big force. 2010 is just the beginning.
Oh, definitely. Everybody at that point, I think, suspected this was a strange, quirky, trendy thing that would not necessarily become, you could say, the way to deliver games and fund them.
Yeah.
Everybody's gotten in there at this point, it seems.
And there wasn't it was just kickstarting the game. There wasn't all this stretch goal and, get a gazillion things. It was, hey, we're trying to make a game. Can you help us out? And it was a very the thing that helped was it was a solid game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No,
it wasn't something that just fell apart.
Honestly, if there had been no good games to come out of Kickstarter the first, I'll say, 2 years, it might not be around in the same way for us, okay? Right, like for gamers. I know that Kickstarter does a lot of other stuff, and it might still be a platform that's there. But if it wasn't putting out some good games, we wouldn't turn towards it. Alien Frontiers was one of the first ones that said this can be done. Yes. We also had, as I said, Hanabi was an award winner that year. And it was interesting because Hanabi was one of the first games that did something that was familiar and showed it to you in reverse. It took something that you were very complacent with, I'll say, and mixed it up for you. Hanabi, of course, you're holding cards. You can see them. They're facing away from you. You can see everybody else's cards. There's a few things that have done that, but not quite like this. And this was kind of the beginning of this idea of like, oh, you like worker placement? How about worker displacement? Oh, you like this thing? How about I take it and I flip it upside down? Eventually, we had deck destruction. That became a thing.
Well, it wasn't even just that, though. Hanabi also kind of brought to the forefront more limited communication.
Yes.
We've seen some limited communication in the past with like older games like Password.
Sure.
And even Dixit had a little bit of that, came out a few years prior. Maybe
Couple of years prior,
like
yeah.
8 or 9. But Hanabi was like, hey, you have to like use deduction and reasoning, and this is a much bigger deal now.
Right.
But this is at first I noticed it. I'll be honest, I was surprised Hanabi was as popular as it was. Looking back now, it's easier to understand why.
Yeah, I think so. It had its finger on the pulse of something that was coming, and you could see it now, right? And then lastly, what I wrote here is that it was a great year, or a continuation, for funky party games. Games that were not word games or speed slapping the table games, right? We had, as you said, Dixit came out 2 years before, but this year had its expansion, Dixit Quest. And then there was Cyrano, which was a party game in which you wrote poetry. There was Catacombs, which I guess you could call a party game with flicking, but a lot of story in there as well, this dungeon crawl flicking game. You had a great one, Mortem Arosa.
That's such a weird game if you've never seen it.
Absolutely strange game in which listening to cubes falling through a tower is how you play, and the game is a murder mystery, kinda. That's the theme anyway. You had Fabula, which was a storytelling game with very pretty illustrations, and you just create a story. So there was this push towards bucking the trend a little bit when it came to the established trivia, word game, speed game. That's what's a party game. That's it. Or you draw, right? Pictionary. There were a few things. These did bizarre things, interesting things. You could even say slightly more intellectual things.
Yeah,
and it worked because it bridged the gap between people that enjoyed playing party games and people that didn't. You could now find an audience for people who considered themselves gamers. They could sit down and go, this isn't brain dead. There's something here. I can play this party game and not feel like I'm wasting my time. Eventually, much later, we had Codenames, which truly destroyed that concept, right?
Sure.
Just brought them together. But I feel like this was the beginning of that. I really like that. All right, so let's go ahead, Tom.
Well, you skipped my stuff, but
What's your stuff?
on the other side
Okay,
of the
what do you
paper.
got? Oh, you got stuff on the other side of the paper?
You didn't see I wrote it there.
No, man. I'm not listening to you.
I like to follow the rise and fall of companies to some degree. I think that's an interesting thing. And I think in 2010 we were starting to see, up to this point, certain companies had dominated the market. And
Yeah.
Mayfair came out with Lords of Vegas, which was a pretty big game, but it felt like a gasp, and they just felt not relevant to gaming as much.
I remember even when Lords of Vegas came out, it no longer looked modern.
Yeah, it was kind of a...
It's a good game. It was well done. They did a good job with it. But immediately you could tell, you could feel the company falling behind.
On a different note, a company that did not fall behind at this point, but definitely I felt like changed a corner this year, was Fantasy Flight Games. Because up to this point, they had done Battlestar Galactica, which was an IP, but most of the stuff was not IP. And we mentioned Rune Wars, but then they did Civilization, a board game. They did another version. They had already done Game of Thrones, but then they did a Game of Thrones Battle Lore. And this was the beginning of them slapping IPs on everything. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely was a change for the company, and you'll notice Fantasy Flight a little bit more in 2012. Small companies were still in existence at this point without Kickstarter. At this point now, it's weird to have a small company that doesn't use Kickstarter. But Asmati became a big deal this year because of innovation. That was like a hot little game that no one knew about, but then everyone did. And Portal kind of started coming to the forefront.
Portal had already put out Neuroshima X a little bit before.
Right.
They came out with a game that followed that. I think it was called Witchcraft. Didn't go anywhere. Nobody knows about it. Then this year they came out with 51st State.
And Preta-Porta.
Yes.
And that's two solid games. And I remember thinking, oh, this is another little... I think it's safe to say at this point, I didn't know Poland was a place where designers would come from. At this point, there's a ton of publishers from Poland.
Yeah, I don't think I thought about it, but it definitely put
I would even argue Eastern Europe in general. This Portal was the first one that made me go, oh, that's interesting. Maybe Czech board games, but it was not. There was not a lot.
Yeah, for me, 51st State was one of those games that definitely made me notice a new company I was not aware of, and I really started to watch what else they were doing at that point.
So anyway, those are just some of the trends that we noticed. What do we got next, Z?
All right, let's talk about some of our picks here, Tom. Why don't you go first and tell me some of the games that stand out for you from this year?
Well, looking back at 2010, first of all, if you want, you can kind of do a companion look to these videos and go back and look at the history of the Dice Tower. 2010 was the year I met Z Garcia.
Is that right? Oh, wow.
In 2010 is the year I moved to America. And 2010 is the year that Jack Vassell was born. It was a pretty big year. Moving to America completely changed how I did reviews. So, suddenly Review Copy showed up like,
yeah, right.
Found the game group here. It's weird. It's almost been 10 years since I've been here. So at this point, there was a few games that I missed because of the transition, like Rune Wars. I was super pumped to play it, but because I moved during this time, I didn't see it.
Huh.
When I look at the different games that go throughout the year, Innovation was one that really popped in mind. Defenders of the Realm. Eagle Gryphon was like on fire for me at this point. And they're different now. Eagle Gryphon has transitioned to a company that's known for their really big Euro games and then a few small things. At this point, they were mostly small things.
Yeah.
They had done, For Sale. They were reprinting smaller games. And Defenders of the Realm, Richard Launius showed to me. It was one of the first games that I kind of brokered getting it printed. He showed it to me, and I went to Eagle Gryphon. At that point, that was the company that I was like, Eagle Gryphon, you got to print this game. I might pick a different company today.
Sure,
in that regard. And in fact, well, you'll see. Also, another small one that people miss from 2010 is Firenze.
Yes.
That tower building game, that's one that I really like a lot.
That game really did not. That game pretty much vanished. And I'll tell you, watching these trends, Glenmore being reprinted, some of these other reprints, feels like it's due. I could see somebody grabbing this and reprinting it.
Actually, it had a minor reprint of sorts a few years ago.
Did it?
Yeah. And then there's a couple more. This was not on a personal level, I liked a lot of games this year. Very few of my top 100 games come from 2010. The Conquest of the Planet Earth was the first Flying Frog game that I really liked.
Yes.
And also the last Flying Frog game that I really liked. And then there was one more that I had on my list here that I thought was interesting from this year, and that was Catacombs. We mentioned Catacombs, but that one I really thought that's a neat idea.
Yes.
Oh, and BattleCon, which also Level 99 was just getting started at this point. But yeah, this was a decent year for me, but groundbreaking for many different reasons. I think you like this year better than me.
I might, but that's not because I like as many games. I like fewer probably ultimately, but I liked some of them a lot more. My tastes were very specific at this time. Not to say that they're not now, but I was trying fewer different things. Like, for example, I remember being taught Trois and really disliking it. I don't know how I would feel about it now.
Sure.
But it was definitely outside where I was comfortable. And I avoided many games that felt that way because they had boring covers, boring themes, a lot of heavy, strategies that clearly seemed to be at play. And I wasn't interested in combining those things, a boring setting with a lot of thinking. I did like an interesting setting with a lot of thinking, and so one of my highlights was 51st State, the card game. The original release of this reminded me of Race for the Galaxy. I loved Race for the Galaxy. I thought it was a really interesting game, what it did. And 51st State came along. It felt more distinct from San Juan. That was very much Race for the Galaxy.
Right.
And it was just immersive, It had a ton of iconography, and I think Portal Games has grown as a company considerably, but this game definitely hooked me. I also liked Seven Wonders. I thought it was a great game, very pretty.
Can't argue that.
Very engaging
Remember
game.
I said Dominion was being played all the time? Right when I got here, though, Seven Wonders was the game.
Yes.
We got 5 people. We can play Seven Wonders. We got 7 people. We can play Seven Wonders.
Yes,
I was
absolutely.
like, all right, enough of Seven Wonders.
Yeah, for me, this is where my my love affair began with card drafting games, I would say. Seven Wonders is the one that did it. I know there were a few card drafting games before, but this is the one that I really felt, wow, games that do drafting do a ton in very little amount of time. And that's still usually true today.
Sure.
It's not just Seven Wonders that's able to pull that off. And then lastly, the other thing that began for me was solitaire gaming. This was the year that Oneira came out.
2010!
Onirim came out, and I forget how I came to it, but I got a copy of the original print, the little deck, and it was so clever. It was so interesting. It was not these big, grandiose war games that are solitaire, because I wanted nothing to do with that. This was something I could put in my pocket. I could play in 15 minutes, and gave me a fulfilling sensation anyway. And it began, like I said, this enjoyment I still find for solitaire gaming that isn't sprawling. That is something I can fit in to do what I want solitaire gaming to do. Fill 30 minutes or an hour. That's it. That's what I want it for. But as you can tell, the kind of games I liked here was pretty specific. Card games with a lot of little powers on the cards. Still true, but we'll talk later on about how I've discovered other things that I also really enjoy now. So there you go.
Convention-wise, missed Origins for like the first time ever. Went to Gen Con for the first time ever. And conventions were still not a grandiose thing. I mean, Essen was big, don't get me wrong. But Gen Con was just starting to kind of buzz up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was coming. I mean, the overwhelming tsunami of games that we talk about was not yet here, but it was close.
Yeah,
it
for
was
me,
close in 2010.
Conventions were not on the horizon. I had never thought about going to one. I honestly had zero interest in going to one.
Really?
I did absolutely have no interest in going to a convention. I thought they seemed busy and loud and frenetic, and I just never even thought about it. We'll talk about when that changed and why in upcoming episodes of this very show. But let's go ahead and move on to possibly the most important part of this, and that is viewers' picks. What did you think of the year? Let's chat a little bit here. Some of your picks. What did you think of these trends? What trends did you spot? All of that good stuff is up for discussion.
And we realize a lot of you weren't playing games back then.
That's also true. That's also very important, very true.
But maybe you've gone back and found some of these. I always think it's interesting when someone will come and say, look at this old game. We're talking about games that are 10 years old.
Yeah.
So,
and in board gaming years, that's a lot, because these games do vanish fairly quickly, the ones that don't stick around, that is.
And I understand that some games that are super popular are going to not be as popular the following years, like Dominion, extremely popular game. If I mention it, most people know what it is, and yet very rarely see it played compared to the new modern stuff.
Definitely.
Well, Scott says that Seven Wonders is still his number one of all time 10 years later. Actually,
it's
quite a few people
game.
are saying that.
I think, again, I think it's important for these games, if they want to stay relevant, and this seems to be the trend, to continue putting out expansions. That truly is important. If you want a board game to stay relevant, however you feel about expansions, it seems they're needed to keep that game buzzing, right? And Seven Wonders is a prime example of that. There are 6 or 7 expansions for this game.
Right.
All of them giving you something new, something interesting, most of them being, connecting with the audience, I would say. But yeah, they kept the game fresh. They kept it coming back to the table and the conversation going.
Yeah, he said, Sean says that 10 years ago I only played HeroScape and Mage Knight, but HeroScape was on its way out. In 2010, they came out with the Dungeons & Dragons version of it, and I was like, oh, okay, not as exciting, but at least it's still around, and it was like a year, and it was gone.
Yeah.
Let's see. Philip said he started the year thinking board games equals Monopoly. He ended the year thinking the same. People are talking about let's see here.
Well, somebody saying we still play vanilla Seven Wonders and still love it. Absolutely, it's a great game. I
wonder how many people still play vanilla Ascension, because I would argue that Ascension and Seven Wonders are the games that came from this year that are still pretty strong.
Yeah.
Like Ascension is still really going strong comparatively.
Yeah.
And they keep coming out with a set, 2 or 3 sets a year.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot, and it seems pretty well. I
was mostly playing Arkham Horror and Dominion, Tannhäuser, Talisman. Those are all, Talisman's a little older, but the rest were definitely buzzing. There were Arkham Horror expansions that came out this year, so the game was still getting a lot of support.
Yeah, someone asked about Glenmore 2. I have played Glenmore 2. Really enjoy it. Did make my top 10 Euro games a little bit earlier, only because I need to see how similar it is to Glenmore. I felt like it almost is the same game with just extra stuff.
Sure.
I'm not sure, but I really, really like it. Want to play it some more too. We've done top 10s of 2010, and we may do that in the future. I don't want to. That's not the focus of this. We're trying to talk about the year as a whole. How much were you invested in the hobby in 2010?
That's an interesting question. I just saw it there, and I'm trying to consider that. Let's see. It was a fair amount because I remember getting Pandemic when it came out at a game store the week it arrived. That was 2 years before this. So I would say enough.
He was at the game store a lot when I went there.
Yeah. It would have been several years before that release of Pandemic that I was still, not that I don't consider myself a casual gamer now probably, but most people probably don't. It would have been a few years before Pandemic that I wasn't as aware of what was available, what was out there, things like BGG, right? So yeah, I was already aware of it all, what's coming on.
That's true, because I
trends.
messaged you through Board Game Geek when I was coming to the area asking him what he thought about it.
Yeah, and I was aware of smaller trends, things like, Z-Man Games publishes games from Japan that they go and find from Japan and repackage. And this company likes to do those sort of things that are below the surface of, I like games, I go and I buy them and I play them. So yeah, a fair amount.
Yeah, so it's amazing to me. The clear game of the year, people-wise, is Seven Wonders, right? Well, so many people are mentioning Seven Wonders. Peter says it was the first game I discovered, other than besides pure Ameritrash.
Sure.
A lot of people talk about how Seven Wonders is still in their top games of all time. What were your game collection sizes at the time? Mine was one of the smallest that had been because I just moved from Korea.
Yeah.
So I had cleared out many, many games. I only had like about 500.
Gosh,
Shut up.
I wish I had that data because that would be really interesting. I don't, unfortunately. I could take a guess. Maybe I'll say 150 games. Maybe it's ballooned to much more than that, and it's tapered off again. It's sort of, right now, for point of reference, it's around 440 games. That's my collection right now. It must have been around 150 at this point. Like I said, I was definitely into games. A lot of those games, though, I'll say, were games I got at Toys R Us.
Yeah.
I was really into, a few years before this, and so the games were still in my collection, I was really into going to Toys R Us and finding weird party games that were not Pictionary or Gestures. Cranium was around this time. Those were like the big ones, the either established or the flashy new kid on the block. Cranium. I liked weirder ones. And you could go to Toys R Us sometimes and get them as they were being liquidated for next to nothing. So a lot of my games were that.
So anyway, that's kind of some interesting things. We'll talk more about this. We're going to come back and do this each day.
Toys R Us, still too soon.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I love Toys R Us. And the other day I was like, I'll go there and get some Christmas stuff. No, I won't.
Nope.
I won't. Anyhow, we're going to be doing this every day, same time for this whole week, and then we'll be sporadic around the holidays, but we're going to get them all done. So tomorrow we'll be back with 2011. I got another top 10 list tomorrow, and we're also playing Death May Die, also known as Tom Zee Gonna Die. Are we going to win?
Oh, we're going to die.
I've not played it before, so.
We are definitely going to die.
I feel like I'm going to bring a machine gun, and a real one. I'm going to shoot the miniature. I don't even know where I would get a machine gun from.
Even if you did, how is that going to help us win the game?
I feel like that would be a win.
All right.
Thank you guys for watching. Come back tomorrow. Be ready to talk about what you like about 2011. Until then, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Zee Garcia.
This is Best of the Decade, 2010.
See ya.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.